This video is sponsored by Frontier Developments. The Bornean orangutan is a very unique animal to build for. Not only do they require lots of things to climb on, but it has to be of a very large scale. I went into this build with a really cool and maybe a little bit of a fantastical idea for the habitat. I immediately started with the terrain sculpting. I knew that this would be a two-tiered habitat, with the upper tier being significantly higher than the lower. Although I wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the orangutans getting up and down from these levels, I did need to make sure that the staff could access both tiers. I don't think it would be very practical to ask the staff to climb down a ladder with a bucket of food. That's where the ramp comes in. Instead of hiding it off to the side, I put it dead center and made it a rather large terrain feature. To get an even slope, I used the flatten terrain tool at a very low strength and just kept going over the areas until it was smooth. The slope would not only be a ramp that connected the two terrain levels, but it would also be a bridge over the large water feature. I didn't plan on making a magnificently large structure in this habitat, so I had to figure out something that would catch your eye, and that's when I decided that it would be a huge water feature, but we'll come back to that later. Before I could do anything else, I did have to put in a shelter for the orangutans, and since I learned that the name orangutan means tree people, I thought what better way to show off that name than building them a treehouse. To make a treehouse, you need a tree of course, so I started there. The rest of the design was pretty simple. It couldn't be too big, or it may look like it doesn't fit in the tree, but it does have to be big enough for all of the orangutans to sleep in. Like the terrain of the habitat, the wooden treehouse was two-tiered. The lower level is an open-air balcony, and the upper level is completely enclosed. I made a very small custom fence as a safety railing for the balcony. I doubt the orangutans really need this safety precaution, but it does look nice. The coolest part about this balcony, though, is the ladder that leads down to the lower tier of the habitat. It's made out of climbable pieces, so the orangutans can actually use it if they want to. The indoor portion of the treehouse is a simple construction of plaster wall pieces trimmed with wooden logs, and it does include a giant window so that the guests can look through into the orangutan sleeping area. I did make sure to use one-way glass though, so the orangutans won't be able to see the guests looking in. And once I placed a few decorations and a thatch roof, the treehouse was done. Let's jump back to that water feature that I planned earlier. You can see that the water kind of passes under the terrain ramp, but it definitely looks underwhelming as is. But now I'm adding in a waterfall. I surrounded the whole water feature with tropical and mossy rocks to make it look more realistic. I also used these rocks to block off the underside of the path to prevent the orangutans from going where they aren't supposed to. I did notice that the path was a bit close to the balcony of the treehouse though. That's where I added a little mesh wall to prevent the orangutans from just jumping onto the path. That wouldn't be good at all. With the escape routes all closed up, now I can get back to the fun stuff. The treehouse, although super cool, probably isn't enough climbing for these orangutans, so I made a custom climbing frame. It goes from the treehouse all the way to the other side of the habitat, featuring a gentle S-curve. There are also places for the orangutans to rest or climb down to the ground along the way. When I took a step back and looked at the whole thing, I still thought it was missing something. See, the climbing frame went over the waterfall, but what if it went over multiple waterfalls instead? Yes, I added not one, but two more waterfalls into this habitat, and tell me that isn't spectacular. Now let's make this whole enclosure look like you've been dropped in the middle of a tropical rainforest. I started with some roots around the waterfall on the exposed rocks. Then I added ferns. Lots of ferns of all different varieties. But the easiest way to make a habitat look tropical is bamboo. It's tall and lush and is great to use both inside and outside of the habitat walls. The habitat was very green and I needed a bit of contrast, so I added some bright pink cordyline plants growing all over the bases of the trees and even the climbing frames. Adding pops of color like this really helps break up the sometimes monotonous green foliage. And of course, the dense rainforest can't just end at the edge of the enclosure, so I made sure to add plants and rocks around the path surrounding the habitat. And yes, I did manage to sneak in another waterfall. I can't help myself. And look at that view. I could sit here all day and watch these orangutans climb around right at eye level. The beauty of this habitat is really based on the abundance of foliage and watching the orangutans explore around the whole thing.